Reddit is a hive of posts and discussion. It's pretty much a subreddit for every topic you can imagine. One such topic is ghost stories. Today we share a handful of ghost stories from the subreddit Ghost Stories. These stories have been submitted by everyday people who have experienced something they cannot explain. They have wanted to reach out and share their inexplicable stories. Today we read through a handful of these tales, exactly as they were posted online, and we ask our viewers, what are your opinions on these stories? Has anything similar happened to you? Sit back and enjoy an uninterrupted compilation of ghost stories from Reddit. This is a Reddit read-through, and you're watching Mysteries Retold. In 2020, at the beginning of COVID, I'd just given birth. At this time, I could only have one other person in the room with me my entire stay at the hospital. Of course, my kid's father was there, but like the third day he left to clean up our house and get everything prepared for me and the baby. I'd gotten sick and ended up having a C-section, so I had to stay in for about 4 to 5 days. Well, while he was away, a nurse named Kelly said she'd be helping me throughout the day and spending time with me so I don't get lonely while the dad's gone. I couldn't really hold my baby due to me being sick and in pain from my C-section, so my nurses would come in when it was time to feed. I noticed whenever they came in they wouldn't really acknowledge Kelly, and she would go to the furthest part of the room, and she would tell me, "I'm just going to get out the way." Now she did tell me that she didn't specialise in what they did, so she was just there for comfort really. I never questioned anything. The entire day she was so helpful and encouraging for me. I really believe I would have broken down if she wasn't there supporting me. She was such a sweetheart. Well, after about 5 or 6 hours, she told me that she had to leave, and she would come back and visit me before the end of her shift to see how I was doing. She hugged me, and then blew a kiss at my baby, and walked out the room. Later that night, Dad came back and he was very upset. He told me some stuff happened with his mum, and that he was sorry he took so long. I was upset, but I told him a nurse called Kelly kept coming in and keeping me company. As I'm telling him about her, my nurse is changing my sheet, and she was like, "Who's Kelly?" I explained, and she said that nobody named Kelly was in my room or working that day. So I instantly thought about those women who pretend to be nurses and kidnap children. My nurse told me that I may be hallucinating, and she told my doctor. I talked to my doctor, and he said the same thing. Well, a couple of hours later, a nurse that I didn't recognise came into my room and said, "I know this might sound crazy, but everyone on the floor is talking about you seeing Kelly." I said, "Yeah, she was in here for like 7 hours today. She helped out a lot." We're smiling and laughing while I was telling her about Kelly and how sweet and funny she was. This nurse then pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of her and Kelly that looked like it may have been taken in the early 2000s. I was smiling now, knowing that I wasn't hallucinating. Then she sat down and told me Kelly died over 10 years ago from domestic violence with her boyfriend. I wasn't too shocked actually, because my entire life I've been dealing with the paranormal. But I got the chills because I'd never had an encounter this deep. Well, the lady gave me a hug and started crying, saying, "Now I know she's okay." Since that day I've been wondering why Kelly came into my room to help me. I kinda wish I could see her again. Okay, so maybe this story isn't terribly impressive, but it's the strangest thing that's ever happened to me and I can't explain it. I'm not on this thread at all and I don't know much about the supernatural or these types of things. Anyone that knows anything about these things, I'd love to know what the hell I saw. So one evening my wife and I are in our den. I have a desk in there and a computer, and so does she. My desk is towards the back of the room and hers is at the front. There's a TV on the wall, and looking towards the TV, the only entrance and exit into the room is to the right. So I'm sitting there playing my game, and so is she. I then saw a small child, 4 or 5 years old. He was a boy, blonde hair, shoulder length, and he just ran into the den, inside the room, stopped for a minute, giggled, and then ran back out of the room. I actually heard his feet on the ground as he ran in and out of the room. He was not see-through or anything like that. My mind just did not accept what had happened. I sat back from my computer and I looked at my wife, and at that time she turned around to me. She said, "Did you see that?" I responded, "That little boy that just ran in and out of here." I had no idea. Now this child entered and exited the room in what I'd say is a really playful way. He was having fun with us. Now I saw him from a different angle than my wife did. And the angle that I saw him from, he ran into the room just inside, stopped for a minute, giggled, and exited. My wife had a much better view, however, because he ran directly at her, stopped and giggled, ran out of the room, and completely disappeared, which blew my wife's mind. And to be honest, the whole thing blows my mind, because I'm very scientifically minded, and I cannot explain this situation at all. So in any case, this might not be a very impressive ghost story, but it happened to me and my wife years ago, and we have no idea what it was we saw. If anyone has any knowledge of these things, I'd appreciate a comment to tell me what you think it was. Years ago, me and my then girlfriend moved into a small one-bedroom bungalow near Sherwood Forest. We were both believers in the paranormal, but didn't think we were moving into a haunted house. We started to notice things about a month after we moved in. We'd just gone to bed one night and were trying to get some sleep when we heard someone moving around in the living room. The flooring was really hollow in that place and you could hear someone in there from anywhere in the bungalow. It sounded like someone walking around and had sat on the sofa. I asked her, "Did you hear that?" And she said yes. I asked her exactly what she'd heard, and she replied, "Someone was walking around the living room and sat on the sofa." We actually thought we were being burgled, to be honest, so I found whatever makeshift weapon I could. I think I picked up a shoe at the time. And I crept out of the bedroom, across the hallway, and burst into the living room, flicking the lights on as I did. But there was nobody there. Now this happened night after night, and after bursting into the living room a few times, I didn't bother anymore, as there was never anyone there. But this was just the beginning. We lived in this bungalow for around 5.5 years, and some of the things that happened there were really strange. For instance, I'd find the toothpaste in the kitchen. Well, none of us had put it there. My girlfriend would take a bath and afterwards ask me what I wanted, as she'd heard me calling her from the other side of the bathroom door. Although I'd never left the living room, and I hadn't heard a thing. I'd be sat watching TV in the living room, and I'd hear someone whisper in my ear. Although I could never make out what it was saying, it scared the life out of me. This activity seemed to be on a cycle. We'd have 3 to 4 weeks of peace and quiet, and then 3 to 4 weeks of activity. We had even seen whatever it was a few times. There was one time my girlfriend was in the bath. She'd generally take 45 minutes to an hour in there, and I was in the living room. I really needed to go to the toilet, and I even ended up standing up and doing a little wee dance. A completely black figure walked straight through the living room door and right in front of me. It walked into the middle of the living room, leant forward as if to check out what I was doing, and then stepped back. When it stepped back, it just dissolved. And that's the closest description I can think of. I just stood there with my brain trying to compute what I just saw. I thought maybe it had been a shadow cast by car headlights or something in front of a large lamp that was on. There were no cars there, and we were at the dead end of a street anyway. I went to the lamp, then I put my hand in front of the lamp while it was on. But there was just too much light, and it cast a too big a shadow to have been that. I've spent a fair while trying to figure out a reasonable explanation for what happened, but I just haven't found one. There was another time I saw it, and I'd gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I didn't want to wake my girlfriend, so I kept the lights off. There was a street lamp that shone through our kitchen and into the hallway, so I could see a little bit. We had a built-in cupboard in the hallway, and I saw this big black thing blocking the light, so I just thought the door was open. So I reached over for the light switch, and this large black shadow took a step back. I'd literally just been stood toe-to-toe with this thing, thinking it was a door. I turned the light back off, and there was no shadow whatsoever. The light shone through the hallway as usual. There were lots of other things that happened over this 5.5 year period that we lived there. but these were probably the most memorable. A family of 4 died in my arms over a few years from AIDS, but the last one had an unusual visitor. Was everything as it seemed? I was a registered nurse for 42 years. 17 years as a hospice registered nurse, and 5 of those years I worked at an inpatient paediatric hospice in a 10-bed caring facility. We would look after newborns to 17-year-olds and terminally ill patients. This was one of my most memorable patients for me, professionally and personally, for the vast amount of love that was shared between myself and their family. I worked in an AIDS inpatient unit in the very early 1990s. One patient was a lovely woman who'd given the disease to her husband and her 1.5-year-old son. The mother was so sick and treatment was so scarce for the disease back then, it was a death sentence. There was a 5-year-old daughter that had tested negative and was the only member of the family to survive, so the mother, so sick, did what she could to spend time with her daughter, to have memories of her mum, as she grew up alone. That mother was a saint. I'd have to give her so much medication for nausea, so every day after school the daughter could eat with her mum. Mum died very quickly, then the little boy, and then the father. The girl went to live with her grandmother. Our AIDS unit closed due to funding, and I moved on to another hospice working with terminally ill children. I worked the night shift, and when I came in one evening, I was told that we had a little girl with AIDS. My mind went back to this family years ago. When I walked into her room, I recognised the grandmother, and there in the bed was the little girl that was to survive as she tested HIV negative. She had converted later. Testing was still in its infancy at the time. The little girl told me to let her cat in the room. Her grandmother said she had no cat, but the girl insisted Oscar was waiting for her outside the glass door. I opened the door and in came a black cat, jumped up on the bed and curled up with the little girl. The grandmother again said she had no cat. It was a hospice and she loved the cat and the cat loved her, so we let Oscar stay. He would come in every night and leave in the morning. I had such a strong feeling that this was not just a cat, but something strong, something spiritual, being there to comfort the little girl, now the last of her dying family. I even spoke to the cat once. I said, "You're not a real cat, are you?" I'd get a strange and wise look from Oscar, and felt that I was in the presence of pure love. Was this an angel, maybe? Her mother? Or both? The night she died, shortly after midnight, Oscar stayed with her for a few minutes after she passed, and then left. He never came back. We never saw him before or after. I think Oscar was there to help the little girl through the transition into her life, and left with the little girl's spirit. What an honour for me it was to be in that presence. Over the years, I was the hospice registered nurse for all 4 families on the day they died. Mum, Dad, baby brother, and the little girl. The love that family shared, that incredible mother, made me a better nurse for the rest of my career. It's been over 30 years now, and I still think about this family every day. I hope I have an Oscar when my time comes. This one happened to my wife and I about 20 years ago. When we got married, things were kind of tough, so instead of a European honeymoon like we wanted, we settled for a trip to Niagara Falls. We stayed in a hotel on the American side near the falls. The day after our wedding, we arrived at the airport and we had a layover in Chicago. Well, our flight was actually overbooked, so they bumped us onto a later flight, which meant that instead of arriving in the late afternoon, we arrived closer to the evening. By the time we arrived in Buffalo, we got our rental car and drove to our hotel. It was after midnight by that point. We went to our room, somewhat exhausted. Our room was kind of a cheesy honeymoon suite, and it had a hot tub in the middle of the room. We never used the hot tub because, to be honest, we couldn't stop thinking, ugh, how many people have had sex in here? Anyway, we got into our room, put our stuff away, and my wife was so tired she just laid out on the bed, on her side with her back turned towards me and the rest of the room. I went to the restroom to wash and set up our toiletries. I heard her talking, so I poked my head out of the bathroom. I said, "Who are you talking to?" She jumped up from the bed and said, "Didn't you just sit here?" I said, "No, I was in the bathroom." She said, "I felt you walk over to the bed and sit next to me." I just said, "Well, you're so tired, maybe you fell asleep and dreamt it." She was like, "No, I was just laying here and you came and walked over and sat on the bed." We both got up and put our pyjamas on, and we were so tired that we just went straight back to bed. I woke up a few hours later to her shaking me awake. At first I was like, "Oh yeah, let's do it." And she said, "No, shut up, there is someone in the room." She's the type of person that needs to sleep in total darkness. So I stumble for the TV remote, phone or lamp. I then managed to turn on the bedside lamp and look around, looked in the bathroom, under the bed. There was no one there. I said to her, "What did you hear?" And she said she heard someone come out of the bathroom and walk over to her side of the bed. Spooked out, we eventually fell back to sleep and got up in the morning to take the tour of the falls. The next night we eventually fell asleep around midnight, only for both of us to be awakened by noises. She grabbed onto my arm and we both kind of sat up looking into the darkness as we heard loud footsteps pacing around our room. I said out loud, "Hello?" Then we felt someone sit on the edge of our bed. I jumped and turned the light on, but no one was there again. Our door was locked. No one was hiding in our room. We fell back asleep again, but only this time with the TV on and on mute. Just as we started to fall back asleep, we heard noises in the bathroom, like someone was in there, but mostly footsteps. But they were kind of louder than footsteps. I was sure someone was in there, and I grabbed an umbrella and was ready to beat whoever came out of that bathroom. But it was empty. The next morning I went to the front desk and I said that our next door neighbours were being a little bit loud over the past couple of nights. She asked for our room number and I told her, but she said we didn't have anyone in the rooms next to us last night. Our room was at the end of the hallway and there was no one on either side of our room. It's a corner room. Okay, so that evening we actually went back to our room a little earlier than previous evenings. We ate some cheese, fruit and crackers with a bottle of wine and just enjoyed our evening really. As we got ready for bed, we were like, okay, TV on, hotel door locked, it's latched from the inside, bathroom door closed, and we didn't hear anyone next door at all. We fell asleep and once again after midnight we heard footsteps in our room. But this time instead of jumping up, we sat there listening to make sure it was in our room. The footsteps were definitely in our room, like right next to my side of the bed, and we could hear it walking round in what seemed like a circle. I whispered to my wife, "That is not from next door." As I did, we both felt our bed go down, as if someone had sat on it. My wife yelled out, "Please leave us alone, we're on our honeymoon." Then we felt the bed go up, as if someone had stood up. We turned the TV off mute and watched reruns of Friends until we fell asleep with the TV noise playing. The next morning I get up and I ask my wife, "Did you go to the bathroom?" She said no, definitely not, and she wasn't going to leave the bed in the middle of the night with a ghost in the room. I said, "Well, someone's opened the bathroom door." That day we went back down to the lobby and asked them if we could switch rooms. They asked us why. My wife then blurts out, "The hotel room is haunted." I thought the lady was going to look at us like we were crazy, but she didn't. She just said, "Okay, I can move your room." She even offered to move our stuff for us as well, but we decided to move it ourselves. That night we got a really good night's sleep, without a pacing ghost in the room to keep us awake. Now I don't know who or what it was in our original room, but we both know what we heard, and it definitely happened. I have this house in Tasmania on top of a hill. It's quite isolated, it's about 30 minutes away from anyone. The history of this hill is unclear, but about 90 years ago there was a bakery that was situated upon the hill, and for unknown reasons this bakery was burnt down. Nothing remained of it apart from a concrete slab that we used for putting dead thorns and dead wood on. The actual house was built several years after that incident, and in truth, it's seen better days, although it's still in okay condition, minus a few leaks that appear every once in a while. I called this house home for a number of years, but then moved away, only to return, and then move, and then return again. It was a bit of a cycle that my entire family were getting sick of, leaving the place we cherish to only come back to it, but slowly watch it get in worse and worse condition. Growing up there, I have many memories of the outdoors as it's a large property, probably about 5 acres. These memories are full of laughter and delight, but from what I can remember of inside the building, the memories are filled with uncomfort and a sense of unease, especially as a young child. It was at this property that several strange and unexplainable things have occurred, both good and bad, and the creepy and the unnerving. But for me to state that only creepy things took place there would be a lie. I have had several encounters, you could say, of a scary nature, and even to this day many people have stated that the scary things only seems to happen when I'm around. Moving shadows or creaking floorboards can be explained away most of the time, but distinct voices of my father who wasn't within 70 kilometres of my house start becoming harder to explain away or put to an excuse like it was the wind or an old house. So moving on, at this property of mine, we had many things that my mother would call spirits. Look, I don't care if you believe in them or not, but they exist, at least around my family. 2 of these spirits are distinct to me and my father because they only play tricks on one of the 2 of us. We've both seen them retrospectively, but only ever when we're together. One of them lives inside and moves things around like chairs and opens doors that shouldn't be opened. I've heard this thing call out to me many times before, but generally I've placed it on me hearing things, because it always happens when other people were inside the house. But there was this one time that I refused to enter the house for 5 hours straight one afternoon, as I distinctly heard my father's voice screaming at me from the top of his lungs. He was calling for help over and over again, but the cry was the same every time, the same volume, the same tone, and it went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before complete silence. At this time, however, my father was at work in town. It was about 75 kilometres away from my current location. I have no idea what it is, but I know that it's a small creature about 3 feet in height, and it only ever shows itself when you're alone, or either with my father and I. The other one is much larger in stature, and it stands about 5 feet tall. From what we can tell, it's a lot more calm and doesn't make much noise above regular conversation, and on many accounts it has shown itself fully, but only to be crouched or hunched over. Both of these entities have no complexion at all, and they show no face. Only when hiding does this thing show its true height, from around trees and such, almost like a shy child. My father swears on everything he holds dear that he has heard this creature call out to him, saying things like, "Dad, Dad, come here," or "Dad, I need you." On several accounts this has happened. We will be moving away from this place once more, but my only hope is that we never return, for I truly fear that if we were ever to come back here, we would not leave, not ever, and that someone would read our names off a headstone here. I think my dorm is haunted. So for starters, I can literally see an old Civil War era graveyard from my dorm window. The first day we moved in, my roommate had a really weird dream, where she went out in the hallway at night and saw a woman dressed in a black gown, standing at the other end of the hall, staring her down. It's kind of weird, but explainable, I guess. Then we both started to hear each other's voices when we were completely alone in the room. I once woke up to the sound of her voice in my ear, only for her to be completely asleep on the other side of the dorm room. One time my roommate was alone in the dorm. She left her phone on her desk and went down to the bathroom. She came back and her phone was on the floor on the other side of the room. The same things happened to me, but with my student ID. It's literally gotten to the other side of the room by the mirror, even though I hadn't been there all day, and it had just been left on my desk. I had a dream about a little girl wearing old-time clothing and pink ribbons in her hair. In the dream, she was holding my hand, and we were walking around. I had this eerie feeling that this little girl wasn't alive. I woke up and had full-body shivers. But finally, this was the absolute last straw. My roommate and I were both sitting on our beds doing our homework. All of a sudden, my roommate's nose starts gushing blood. She starts getting up to grab a tissue when the top shelf part of her desk moved forward across the desk by itself, and it flipped over her chair onto the floor. The desk had been up against the wall, and there was literally nothing that could have pushed it forward. I'm sure that this dorm is haunted. This is not my story, but it's my grandpa's story. My grandpa lives in an older house by himself. My grandma passed away in August of 2021, leaving behind a house full of old antiques. Each room's filled with all sorts of things, from old glassware to old bonnets that ladies and girls used to wear. She collected many different things. She was a hoarder, but she'd kept her house clean and her antiques organised. Anyway, throughout the years of her collecting, strange things would always happen. They would hear whispering, or see people that they can't explain in their house. Ghosts, they said. After a while, they just got used to it. But since she's passed away, my grandpa's continued to have paranormal experiences. This is one that happened recently. There are 3 bedrooms in the house. My grandpa used to sleep in the bedroom to the back, but ever since Grandma passed, he moved to the bedroom at the front of the house. He figured that it's a bit easier for him to get to the bathroom. One night he got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. He's very used to paranormal things happening to him, but this experience scared him. He started walking to the bathroom and suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. In front of him stood a woman. He said she was wearing a white dress with red shoes. She had blonde hair that was tied back. He stood there as she walked towards him and didn't say a word. She didn't say anything to him. She just carried on walking towards him. The next thing you know, she's vanished right before his eyes. He stood there for a few seconds, wondering what the hell's just happened to him. He told me that after he witnessed that, he no longer had to go to the bathroom, and he's just not seen her since. So I asked him if she looked transparent or if she looked like a regular person. He says she didn't look transparent, and she just looked like a random person walking towards him in his house. Until she disappeared, that is. He said it really spooked him, and he hopes that he doesn't see her again. My grandpa has many more stories like this that I'll post. I have a few myself as well. What do you guys think this was? The house I grew up in was haunted, and these are some of my stories. I recently watched a video on YouTube that reminded me of the things that happened to me when I was a kid. It's something that I think often about, trying to think of anything that could possibly explain what I saw and the experiences I had. I was just a kid, around 6 or so, when I had my first experience with something unexplainable. I was cleaning up my room, and I had a lot of toys laying around. I remember I had a pair of plastic handcuffs that were just laying on the ground, and as I was walking towards them to pick them up, all of a sudden they just sort of jumped at me, like someone had picked up one of the cuffs and kind of tossed it a little bit. It was almost like a frog jump. It was extremely bizarre, and I can still remember it because I had no idea how it happened, and it shocked me at the time. Nothing else was touching it. Nothing. I still think about that strange moment a lot. My next story, I was a few years older. Our house had an unfinished basement, and all that was really there was a 2x4 wall with no sheetrock, so you could just walk in between the rooms if you wanted. And as soon as you got to the bottom of our stairs, there was a hallway to the right. If you walked down there, you'd get to a room where we had our TV set up in. We would play our PlayStation in there all the time. It was pretty late in the evening this one night, and the only light was from the TV that we were using. We had the TV set up so that when you looked to your right, you could see down the hall that leads to the stairs. At some point I looked over to the hall, which was pitch black, and I thought I saw a silhouette of my twin brother. I said, "Hey, can you turn on the light?" because the switch was right at the entrance of this hall, but he didn't say anything. So I asked him again, "Hey, can you turn on the lights?" Then I saw this silhouette move from the entrance of the hallway to the room behind where the TV was. As it moved though, it was like it was getting bigger, like the size of an adult. Then it proceeded to move behind the TV, then just sink behind it, and it vanished. I freaked out, as did my older brother. and we ran upstairs to find my twin brother with my mum. Some years later we had a PC set up down there as well. I remember one night my brother running upstairs to find me and asking if I was down there, because while he was on the computer, he heard something breathing behind him. Now, I can't say how true it was because it wasn't my experience, but I believe him, and he probably did hear something. Another time, I went down the stairs and I took a right to walk down the hallway. As soon as I turned to look down the dark hallway, there was what appeared to be a pair of glowing eyes that looked at me, and they were opening up slowly. I remember feeling pure dread, and it almost made me vomit how scary it was. I immediately ran back up the stairs. Now, when I was younger, I would sleepwalk a lot. I'm not sure why, and I certainly don't do it these days. But I would sleepwalk and I would wake up down in the basement sometime. It was very creepy. And as I got older, I thought maybe all of this was in my head. Things did die down a bit in my teenage years, but then when I was 18 I had another experience I can't explain. I was sitting in my dining room one evening, and I was by myself just on the family computer that we had set up there. It was near the stairwell that led back to the basement, when all of a sudden I started hearing voices. Voices that sounded like they were coming straight from the basement. I really had to question myself if it was just in my head. Am I hearing this right? So I got closer to the stairwell and I was certain it was coming from down there. It went on for about half an hour before it stopped. I couldn't make out any words, but it just sounded like people were whispering and saying things I couldn't make out. We moved out very shortly afterwards, and I've never experienced anything paranormal since. I'm 100% convinced my childhood home was haunted. My mum died, and I knew. My mum had bowel cancer and was in hospital. That night I was at a friend's house sat on the sofa, and right in front of me was a fireplace with a clock on it. Anyway, I'm sat there, and my friend's in the adjoining kitchen washing up, and this unbelievable quick feeling suddenly wraps itself around me. It was like a black blanket of pain and sorrow, and I feel something shoot through me, right through the centre of my body. It was like a real strong fast blast of air, but it was concentrated into a pocket. It was thicker than air, probably the density of water, and it travelled through me so fast that there was a thumping feeling on my back as it exited. It was so fast that my body jolted forward with it, partially because of the force, but partially because I just wasn't expecting it, and it hit me so quickly it made me jump. The pressure of this force, it didn't hurt physically, but all I could feel at the time was this sadness, this sorrow. It all happened so suddenly, and lasted for about 5 minutes. I just knew what it meant. I knew what it was, and I looked at the clock. It was 9:37 p.m. After collecting the time and my mind, I called into my friend in the kitchen. I shouted to her, "I think my mum's dead." She responded, "Excuse me? Your mum's dead?" I said, "Yeah." My friend came running into the living room. She said, "How do you possibly know?" I told her that I felt something travel through me. She calmed me down and told me not to be silly. I told her to look at the time, and I repeated, "I know my mum's dead. I felt it," I said. I sat there for the rest of the night, so sad. It was a depression. I knew she was gone. I got home in the morning, and shortly after, me and my brother got through the door, the phone rang, and the hospital called to tell me she had died. I already knew, and it was still shocking, but probably shocked me more because I knew that thump that went through my middle and out my back that night, the thing that had made my body jolt, was my mum, extremely shortly after she died. I didn't know the time of death until I got her death certificate a few months later. The time was 9:31 p.m. My mum was in a hospital 4.5 miles away, and none of it makes sense. Nearly 20 years later, it still doesn't make any sense. But that's what happened to me, and that's how it happened. I'm convinced it was my mum. Guys, thank you for listening to this short collection of ghost stories from Reddit. These are stories that have been shared by everyday people. Stories these people claim are true. What do you think about these stories? Has anything similar happened to you? Let us know your stories in the comments. If you're a fan of ghost stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, as not to miss any future ghost stories or strange mysteries from around the internet. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.